Let's start with the topic pro-social behavior. The term pro-social, in this term, the word pro means towards. It is pro, it's towards this thing. So pro-social behavior is a behavior that is directed toward the society. So this is actually the pro-social behavior. It covers a broad range of actions intended to benefit one or more people other than oneself. Any behavior such as helping, comforting, sharing and cooperation etc. all comes in pro-social behavior. Many of the times the word altruism is used to refer to a subset of such behaviors like this self-sacrificial helping or helping in the absence of any obvious external reward. Altruism basically refers to an act performed voluntarily to help someone else when there is no expectation of receiving a reward in any form, except perhaps a feeling of having done a good deed. By this definition, therefore, whether an act is altruistic or not, it will depend on the intention of the helper. If the stranger who risks his own life, when any stranger risks his life to pull a victim from burning buildings or any clashes, like any accidents that has been occurred, and he helped the victims and then vanishes anonymously into the night without any chance of receiving a reward or public recognition, has performed an altruistic act. So, if there is no reward in exchange of your good deed, if you don't expect any reward, any action, any reaction to your action, then you have done a altruistic act. Many pro-social acts are not altruistic. For example, if you volunteer to work for a charity to impress your friend, then that won't be a altruistic act, because your act was actually directed for your self-satisfaction, because you wanted to impress someone else. So any kind of expectation of reward in exchange of your behavior won't be counted as an altruistic behavior. So pro-social behavior actually ranges over a continuum from the most selfless acts of altruism to helpful acts motivated entirely of the self-interest. All the pro-social behaviors that you do, that need not be motivated by altruism. Okay, and all the altruism behavior or altruism need not produce any pro-social behavior. To understand altruism, we must distinguish it from egoism. What is egoism? In egoism, the individual is self-centered and he does all the activity for the benefit of himself, for the benefit of the individual in some way or the other. It is an action of the individual preference. It is for their own good or self-interest. For example, I might help someone cause in return I'll get something that will be beneficial for me. That is a give and take thing. So when I am doing a good thing, that is obviously a pro-social behavior. That is not anti-social behavior. I am doing a good thing. But I want something in return and I expect something in return. Then that will be egoism and not altruism. For altruism, we won't expect anything in return. In the same way, another concept is collectivism. What is collectivism? As altruism is for the benefit of other people, collectivism is the benefit of a group. The ultimate motivation is intended for the benefit of a particular group. For example, a religious group, for example, a political group, whatever agenda they put up is for their betterment, for their party growth. So that is collectivism. And another thing is principalism, and that is upholding any moral principle. For example, justice. So these are the concepts that are related to prosocial behavior. To understand prosocial behavior fully, we should be able to distinguish between these terms of altruism, egoism, collectivism, principalism. Our everyday experiences provide many examples of prosocial behavior. Like Maguire indicated, there are actually 72 different types of helping among the young adults. He did a study and found out different acts of helping included casual help, like giving someone a direction, picking up a dropped paper, a substantial help, like lending money to someone, helping in packing, emotional help, like listening to someone when that problem is depressed or that person has a problem. It can be an emergency help, that is taking someone to the hospital or serving someone who is in dire necessity. That can also be possible. So there are various pro-social behaviors, but that might not be altruism. If a person helps in order to get the praise or money of others that the person is not perceived to be, then this person's behavior is not perceived to be, or we can't think of it as behaving altruistically. If someone works only for the self reward of feeling good, now this feeling good, whether this thing is something we are asking in against our deed, that is obviously debatable. So there is a debate ki whether my want for feeling good, or this my self satisfaction feeling by doing a good thing, will that be an altruistic job or not? That thing is still debatable, because that motive is now questionable, because I want the self reward of feeling good for my act. Now, whether the person receives an extrinsic reward or not, that is irrelevant. But if I am feeling good, I am getting an intrinsic reward. So, this is also acting as a reward. So, if I am acting in direction of a reward, or I am acting so that I can get a reward, fetch a reward, be it externally or internally, then that obviously won't be altruistic act. So it is only one's expectation about being rewarded for helping actions that are relevant to the judgment of altruism. There are various theoretical perspectives explaining the helping behavior. The first of this kind is the decision-making perspective, which focuses on the process that influences judgments about when help is needed. This perspective was proposed by Latane and Darley, and it involves 5 steps. The first step is this is a very crucial step in any prosocial act, that is noticing something happening and deciding that the help is needed in this situation. That is recognizing the situation as an emergency that needs help. The second step in deciding to help is taking personal responsibility. That is taking charge of that situation. That is taking the responsibility that this is my responsibility to help or to act in this situation. The third step is weighing the costs and benefits of the help rendered. Sometimes it is relatively easy to help, at the other times sometimes helping involves considerable costs in time, energy, and complications. Like telling time to a person on the road, that requires very little effort. But pulling off a stranded motorist who is stranded in his vehicle, or helping some victim who is stuck in any massacre or accident, require more costs in form of, because it's time consuming and obviously it consumes your energy more. So in both situations, the cost depends in part on whether you perceive any inconvenience or possible threat to your own safety. The greater the perceived cost, the less likely you will help the person. Now coming to the final step in decision making process is figuring out what type of assistance to offer and then taking the action. So fourth and the fifth step is combined in this one. Here the person decides on how to help that person, and then he finally puts that plan into action so that that person can be helped. So this is the decision making perspective explaining the helping behavior. Next perspective on prosocial behavior is the learning perspective. People generally learn to help in two ways. One, through reinforcement, that is the effects of rewards and punishment for helping. And the other is through modeling, that is people learn by observing others who help. Then we have the sociobiological perspective. According to sociobiology, any genetically determined trait that has a high survival value tends to be passed on to the next generation. Sociobiologist Robert Trivers has argued that only mutual or reciprocal altruism is biologically based. It also says that one is more helpful to immediate family than to distant relatives or strangers. The theory also predicts that parents behave more altruistically to healthy offspring than to the unhealthy ones who are less likely to survive. Now, the reason for such behavior is that the closed ones are more likely to return the help or help them if they need, rather than the distant ones. So, this is also called a kinship altruism. That is, the persons who are keen to me, who are close to me, is more likely to get my attention, my altruistic behavior, rather than the ones who are distant. The critics of sociobiology argue that the social factors are much more important than biology in determining prosocial behavior among people. As prosocial behavior generally benefits society, it has become a part of the social rules or norms. Three norms are generally relevant to the helping behavior. One is the social responsibility, second is reciprocity, and the third is social justice. First, the norm of social responsibility prescribes that one should help others who depend on the other people for help. Like parents are expected to care for their children, and social agencies may intervene if parents fail to live up to this obligation. Sometimes obligations are written into law. Laws are one way of emphasizing to people that they have responsibility to help. The second norm of reciprocity says that we should help those who help us. That is, one should return one's help. If I have helped someone, then it is expected that the person will help me in return someday. In fact, several studies have shown that people are more likely to help someone from whom they have already received an aid. Lastly, human groups have also developed norms of social justice, that is, rules about fairness and the just distribution of resources. According to this principle, if two people are making equal contribution to a task, then they should receive equal rewards. If one receives more than the other, then it it should be tried to restore the equity by redistributing the reward so that both the parties receive the same amount of reward from that task. These three norms, that is the social responsibility, reciprocity and social justice, are common in human societies. All human societies actually. Through this process of socialization, the individuals learn these rules and they come to behave in according to these societal rules, which serves as the guidelines for the pro-social behavior. Now we are coming to the determinants of pro-social behavior, or the motives behind helping someone. These motives can be classified into environmental factors, dispositional factors, and situational factors. Researchers have found that environmental conditions like weather, noise level, and city size influences helpful behavior. Researchers are indicative of the fact that people are more likely to help when the weather is comfortable, that is, it is neither too hot nor too cold. Another environmental factor is noise. There are researches that show that loud noise causes people to ignore others in the environment and motivates them to leave the situation quickly, thus creating less helpful behaviors. And thirdly, for the location, that is the city size, it is basically a common stereotype that the city dwellers are unfriendly and unhelpful, whereas the small town residents are cooperative and helpful. Researchers find that when it comes to helping strangers in distress, the city size is really important. Strangers are more likely to be assisted in small towns than in large cities. Individual differences in helpfulness do exist, and here the dispositional factors play their role. First is the mood of the helper. There is considerable evidence that people are more willing to help a stranger when they are in good mood. Apparently, a warm glow of positive feeling increases the willingness to act pro-socially. Or another possibility may be that being in a good mood leads us to have more positive thoughts. So being in good mood initiates helping behavior. Next motive for helping is empathy and personal distress. Personal distress refers to our own emotional reactions to the plight of the others, our feelings of shock, horror, concern, or helplessness. However, how we react to the plight of others. Personal distress occurs when people who witness an event are preoccupied with their own emotional reactions. In contrast, empathy refers to feelings of sympathy and caring for others, in particular to sharing vicariously or indirectly in the suffering of others. Empathy occurs when the observer focuses on the needs and emotions of the victims. Personal distress leads us to feel anxious and apprehensive, and empathy leads us to feel sympathetic and compassionate. So when we have a personal distress, that is our emotional reaction pattern to the plight of the others, to the problem of the others. But in case of the empathy, we actually understand indirectly, we try to find out the problem, we try to share that problem and find out the solution to the problem in a compassionate way. We feel the problem in a sympathetic way. In general, personal distress motivates us to reduce our own discomfort. We might do this by helping a person in need. However, we might also feel better by escaping from that situation or ignoring the suffering around us. Furthermore, this helping, motivated by the desire to reduce our own discomfort, is egoistic. As we have discussed egoism, so this won't be altruistic behavior then. In contrast to this, empathic concern usually motivates us to help the person in need. Since the goal of the empathic concern is to enhance the welfare of someone else, it provides an altruistic motive for helping. Then there are some characteristics of the victims that gets more attention. Those who are physically attractive are more likely to receive aid. Then the degree of similarity between the potential helper and the person in need is also important. It has been seen that people are more likely to help those who are similar to themselves. In addition to evaluating the deservingness of the need itself, potential helpers may make inferences about the causes of the person's need, following the principle of attribution theory. Studies indicated that the key causal factor is personal control. That is, we are more likely to help someone if we believe that the cause of problem is outside that person's control. That means that problem was uncontrollable or that problem was unavoidable. In addition to these, some other dispositional variables may be courage, risk-taking behavior, sex of the helper, age, self-confidence, intelligence, leadership qualities, physical strength, sensitivity, moral reasoning, religiosity, socio-economic status. So there are several other factors, several dispositional factors that can actually predict who will help or who will receive the help. Now, the last factor is the situational factor. The most important situational factor is the effect of the bystanders. That is the person who are there, who are witnessing that problem. Now, who are the bystanders? Suppose there is an accident on the road. Other than you or other than me, many of the people are witnessing the same. So, the people other than me who stand beside me or who all have witnessed that same scene are my bystanders. Now, as the number of bystanders increases, it is less likely for helpful behavior to occur. That means the number of bystanders actually inhibit the helpful behavior. Now, why so? Firstly, it is due to the diffusion of responsibility that is created by the presence of other members. Now, as the same accident is witnessed or the same problem is witnessed by many people, the obligation to help and the possible costs of failing to help are shared. Further, if a person knows that others are present but cannot actually talk to them or see their behaviors, the person may assume that the others have already done something to help. So, the responsibility of helping that gets shared when there are other people with me involved in the same problem. We all are witnessing the same scene, so it is presumed that it might be the others have already helped, or if I am not helping, then somebody will eventually help. So my act of responsibility there diminishes. Another thing is that is the ambiguity of the need. The potential helpers are sometimes uncertain whether a particular situation is actually an emergency. The behavior of other bystanders can influence how we define a situation and react to it. If others ignore a situation or act as if nothing is happening, we too assume that there might not be any emergency. That is the impact of the bystanders on interpreting the situation. I might think that they are also not helping, they are not going to, that means it might not be that much important. They are if they are ignoring, that means it is not of that importance that it needs help. So that thought also get shared with all. The third factor in the bystander effect is the evaluation apprehension. That is, as nobody is doing anything, if I do something, it might not be right, or it might actually give rise to some negative reactions. The desire to avoid the cost of the social disapproval can inhibit the action. However, there are also situations in which this evaluation apprehension can make us more likely to help. For example, if we see someone falling down from the stairs, or if we see someone having an heart attack, the socially appropriate response will be to render the assistance. Apart from this bystander effect in the situational variable, there are certain other things like the friendship or the severity of the need and the number of the bystanders, as I already said. So these situational factors also determine the motive behind helping, or it actually is a determinant of a prosocial behavior. Now, with this, we are coming to the end of the topic prosocial behavior. I guess it's clear. If you have any confusion, obviously you can reach out to me in the classroom box or in this chat box. Thank you, class.